Thank you very much, Ian, and welcome to the Grain stage for the afternoon. I'm going to be hosting for the rest of the afternoon, so if there's anyone out there who is speaking, do let yourself be known to me so that I know who you are. And for the moment, I'm going to be talking about what's wrong with Fiat. And for anybody who's very new into this game, Fiat just means our normal currency. So here's a quote from Mark Twain, who I'm very keen on. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And believe me, there's a hell of a lot of that going on in the space of money. And particularly when we talk about money that's controlled by governments and by central banks. So, money, myths, lies, and deception. Let's look at the first. Yeah, I've got it. Thanks, Ian. Money, myths, lies, and deception. Well, there's a lot of that about. And you'll find there's also a lot of that about in the crypto space. So don't be deluded into thinking that it just applies to the financial markets. But there is a lot being said about crypto that's coming from the financial markets, that's influencing the way a lot of people are thinking, that's making us think internally about how we do things and what's happening next. So, myths. When I say I'm in cryptocurrency, people come up with all sorts of things. Often I get notes waved at me and I'm told that I'd much rather be invested in this. This is real money. Well, this is money. No, it's not. This represents about 3% of the currency in circulation. 97% of the money in circulation in the UK at the moment, probably more now, is in the form of loans and debt. And to be honest, and it fascinates me that what we hear from the main banking world is that, digital currency isn't real currency, because they are peddling a complete myth about their own currency. Most of it is digital currency, is money held on a ledger at a central bank. And frankly, the banks have much worse encryption and security around their systems than the blockchain will ever have. So the myth that this is money, that cash is money, is large. The banks are creating money on a whim, and they've been doing that for years. The other thing that I hear really often, and I heard it today from someone at the show, is that money has intrinsic value. Well, it may not be news to most of you, hopefully it isn't, but the UK left the gold standard in 1931. That's a hell of a long time ago. And the Americans left in between 1971 and 1973. So we no longer can go into a bank and say, here's my £5, I want the equivalent in gold. And that's even if you believe that gold has an intrinsic value. To me, a sandwich has more intrinsic value than a bit of gold, but that's a moot point. So those are two major myths about cryptocurrency that I think you can throw back at people whenever they tell you that this is real money. So moving on, I'm going to talk a bit about the deception and corruption in the money markets. And I'm going to start by telling you a bit of a story about the airline industry. And you're probably going to wonder what the hell I'm on about, but I will come to that in a minute, I'll tell you. So the airline industry in 1971 had quite a lot of crashes. And they put in place a system whereby a black box was installed on every aeroplane. And they also put in place a system whereby if you, as a pilot or a steward or anyone in the industry, made a mistake, or you noticed something that wasn't right with your aircraft or anything like that, you had 2 weeks to report it to those in authority, at which point during which time you would be immune from any comeback on it, even if it had been your fault. And the airline industry last year had its first year of 0 deaths in commercial airlines. And they have done that by gradually moving downwards. And that's despite massive increase in the number of us flying. They have an amazing reporting system for error and fault and all the rest of it. Usually in the literature, this is compared to the medical industry, which is appalling. I think the money industry makes a great comparison too, because in the money industry we have no way of reporting things back. People are protected when they report and all the rest of it. So, coming on to some of the lies in the financial markets, wealth trickles down. Well, I talked at the first about how the banks create money by giving us debt, right? Well, our central government does the same. Since 2008, our central government has released into the markets £375 billion, and with the view and the fanfare was that this would trickle down through the economy to those at the bottom. So if they'd given that money out, it would have been £6,000 each for every man, woman and child in the UK. Every man, woman and child would have received £6,000. As it happens, we think that about 8p in every pound trickled down, so less than £600 trickled down into the economy. And what happened was they put it into the banks. The stock market increased by 20%. So the 5%, the main people investing in the stock markets are the rich. The top 5% made probably about £128,000 each out of it. And the man on the street made less than £600 out of it. So this is one of the lies that is perpetuated through government about the way in which trickle-down effect works. It doesn't. They could have done something else with the money. Instead of putting it into the markets, they could have put it into infrastructure projects. And most people on the left would argue that if they'd put it into infrastructure projects, it might have created 2.5 times the amount of money that it did. So it might have created 750 billion and created 12,000 per head of benefit. Obviously, if you give money to poor people, they're much more likely to spend it than if you give it money to rich people. So here's one of the major lies that our government has been telling us about the money supply. Deceptions, cheats, and weasel words. Well, now we come on to the 2008 crisis. And if you are in Bitcoin or interested in cryptocurrencies, I can't suggest strongly enough that you watch The Big Short and Banking on Bitcoin, both of which are absolutely fascinating insights into what goes on with money. But to put it in short, the banks, since the deregulation of the markets with Reagan and Thatcher, have created all sorts of money instruments which allow them to manipulate the cost of food, the way in which mortgages work, and mortgages were the cause of the downfall in 2008. But they also manipulate the price of food, and many would say there is some responsibility lying at the foot of banks for crises in Syria and all around the world. In 2008, or early on in the 2000s, they started running out of mortgages to put into the money instruments that they were selling. And they then started going out and selling mortgages that they knew people were never going to pay back. They also put them at very low interest rates for 2 years. So a very, very bright man called Michael Burry discovered this in about 2007 or so and started shorting the markets, betting that those mortgage instruments would fail. He was right. He tried to tell the Fed in America. They didn't want to listen. Since the whole thing has collapsed, he's tried to tell the Fed how he knew it was going to collapse on a number of occasions, and they haven't wanted to know. As a result of 2008, get my figures right here, $5 trillion was wiped off pensions, $5 trillion. I'm going to give you the American figures. $5 trillion was wiped off pension funds and real estate. 8 million people lost their jobs and 6 million people lost their homes. Nobody, but nobody, went to jail over that. Not a soul. I personally lost $25,000 in a property deal because the irony of the situation was that though the banks had created the problem in the first place, the banks were then still responsible for creating the rules around which they loaned out money. So in 2008, very early on after the crisis, mortgages became completely unavailable. So deals that people had set up all fell through. I lost 25 grand. I know for a fact, that was in pounds, I know for a fact that out of the deal that I was involved in, £4 million was lost for about 40 or 50 investors. So that's a drop in the ocean of what was lost in this country. Lots of money was lost by lots of individual people around the country. So who are the crooks in this whole affair? When we talk about money, we talk about trust. You know, I spoke at the beginning about how money is no longer linked to the gold standard. So what is money if it's not linked to something with intrinsic value? Well, it's something to do with trust. We have trust in our government that they will uphold the value of our money. The Venezuelans had trust in their government too. So did the Germans at the end of the Second World War in 1945. They ended up wheelbarrowing money around the streets to pay for things. And that's happening in other countries too. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that that could happen again. And believe you me, no regulation has been put in to stop what happening in 2008 happening again. In fact, in 2015, very similar financial structures and deals started to re-emerge. So we are cruising for a bruising if we trust in our normal form of money completely. And my belief, and I'm sure many of you here have some kind of belief in the crypto system, which puts the trust in the hands of the many and allows, in the case of Bitcoin, for example, those computers to do the trusting, if you like. They're responsible. It's about solving complex problems. So this is Charlie Shrem. Has anyone heard of Charlie Shrem? He was one of the very early Bitcoin developers, and he started an exchange in New York in 2010-ish, 2011, I think. And as part of that, he took some money to buy Bitcoin from somebody who he knew was selling Bitcoin to somebody who was buying drugs. So he took some money from somebody who he knew was going to sell it to somebody who was going to buy drugs on a website called Silk Road. And for that, he was put in jail for 2 years. So our legal systems and our banking systems are desperately trying to make examples of people. This was a case in point. I live in Lewes in Sussex, a nice sleepy little town. I could go to an ATM any time of the day and go and buy heroin with the money that I got out of the ATM, right? Our banks have been bankrolling the mafia and the Mexican drug lords forever. We know that, and we know in some cases they have been held to account for it. HSBC, that's the one. HSBC was fined 170 million for knowingly doing that at one point. Charlie Shrem's main problem was that he wrote it down in a couple of texts to this guy, you know? So the Credit Suisse and all the rest of them have been getting away with it for years. You know, they're responsible for thousands of beheadings in Calabria and Sicily, probably, and all the rest of it. But have they ever been held to account for that? Not really. And this is the guy looking over his shoulder. So, this is, you know who this is, right? Anyone? Come on. Mark Carney. This is Mark Carney, the head of our Bank of England. Okay? He is definitely looking over his shoulder. Over the past couple of years, he's been regularly putting out comments about what Bitcoin means, how terrible it is, how it's not regulated, blah, 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 blah. At the same time as which his currency, the pound, has plummeted on the exchange markets, and Bitcoin has gone up by 10 times. So, you know, and he's overseen a lot of what's been happening in the money markets. which I believe is pure thievery and crookery in many cases. I leave it up to you. Do your research. Do look into it, because there are some fascinating stories to be told, and there are lots of. I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg. I've had 20 minutes, so I've just given you the tip of the iceberg. If you look into LIBOR, and occasionally they will make an example of somebody like Nick Leeson, but they have the same means with which to follow things. They have that black box. All of the exchanges, the transactions that are made on most of the markets are up there in digital form somewhere. They could be traced. They're not being traced. They're being traced through blockchain for sure, because they want to catch us. But it's a fascinating story, and do look into it. Where do you want to place your trust? You might want to put a bit of it into crypto just to hedge your bets. I'm Fiona Cooper. I run Brighton Crypto Women, and we meet up monthly if anyone's down in the south. And if you're a woman, hardly any. So yeah, you are welcome to come along if you're a woman. And I am open to men who are gentle in the space rather than who are going to slam anyone for asking a dumb question, because that's what I find in most of the crypto space. Open to talking to anyone about why it's only open to women as well. I'm on Steemit. I haven't really started on there yet, but I intend to do some steaming, and I'm Digital Fiona. And if you want to email me, do so. Those are my details. And in the name of being open and transparent, if there's anything about what I've said that doesn't strike a chord with you, or which you think is incorrect, I want to know, because I will change that. Thank you.